morning and welcome to Newspaper Review. I am Cassie Tony and I'll be taking you through the segments. First, we'll start with a new Telegraph, boldly written. Terrorists place 6 billion naira ransom on victims adopted in Kaduna and Borno. You see that on page 3, 4, 27 and 29 of the newspaper. Then at the top of the newspaper on page 3, you will see Nigerian exchange posts strong bullish run with 10.63 trillion naira gain in 10 days. Still in the same newspaper, 2027 party politics, we are not in talks with PRP. Coming from the ADC, you get that on page 3 and page 4 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper on page 6, Baba Ahmed says Tinubu disconnected from Nigeria's hardship. Then on page 2 of the newspaper, Atiku Kam holds talks with U.S. congressional staff over election integrity concerns in Nigeria. Still in the same newspaper on page 6 and page 27, retired police officers protest over pensions scheme blocks Aso Villa gate. At the bottom of the newspaper on page 2 and page 4, you will see Middle East crisis. Oil prices rise as Iran rejects new talks. Still in the same newspaper on page 4, APC releases 2027 election timetable. Sets presidential form at 100 million naira. Governorship form at 50 million naira. Away from that newspaper to the Nation newspaper. In the Nation newspaper on page 3, it is boldly written, APC presidential governorship primaries fixed for May 15 and 23rd. On top of the newspaper, ABGA planned primaries for May 23rd. You get it on page 2 of the newspaper. Then on page 3 of the newspaper, Ogun East stakeholders lock out Daniel at Abiodun's senatorial endorsement meeting. In page 3, still in page 3 of the newspaper, YIG's panel on state police gave 60 months timeline. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Trust, boldly written on page 3 and 4 of the Daily Trust. INEC clears chair, Amupitan must go, protest Swell. INEC clears chair, Amupitan must go, protest Swell. On top of the newspaper, on page 16, 2027 Obi Kwankwaso supporters launch OK movement. On page 12 of the newspaper, hours to WAEC exams, FCT teachers down tools. On page 6 of the newspaper, APC begins primaries May 15. Pegs presidential form at 100 million. On page 5 of the newspaper, police retirees take protest to Villa pension scheme. Police retirees take protest to Villa over pension scheme. Then on page 5 of the newspaper, 3 soldiers, 12 others killed. Passengers adopted in Kwara and others. Over 3 soldiers, 12 others killed. Then in page 7 of the newspaper, Tinubu approves new police academy campus. 15 billion naira take-off grants. On page 7 of the newspaper, what you need to know about new BVN rules. Away from that newspaper to the Leadership newspaper, boldly written on page 4 of the newspaper, APC unveils 2027 election timetable. Fixed presidential governorship form at 100 million naira and 50 million naira. At the top of the newspaper, PDP, Wike, Turaki comes, trade fresh babs. You get it on page 7 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper on page 7 of the newspaper, defeat terrorists before granting amnesty, reintegration, AGC to the federal government. The AGC tells the federal government to defeat terrorists before granting amnesty and reintegration. Still in page 6 of that same newspaper, bandit attack Kwara community killed 4 soldiers. Bandit attack Kwara community killed 4 soldiers. 36 blind candidates take UTME in Bauchi. You get it on page 28 of the newspaper. And on page 7 of the newspaper, go after terrorists until they are eliminated, CDS tells troops. On page 7 of the newspaper, CDS tells troops to go after terrorists until they are eliminated. Rescued UTME candidates. We gave bandits soft drinks, paid ransom, say negotiators. You get that on page 12 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Sun. Boldly written on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Sun. Bloodbath in Plateau. Benue, Kwara State. Bloodbath in Plateau. Benue and Kwara State. At the top of the newspaper on page 4 and page 5 as well, you see Boko Haram dares federal government. Over 416 victims in Borno. Still in the same newspaper on page 25, you'll continue from page 25 of the newspaper states. Debt hit 4.36 trillion naira. 10 lead with 2.96 trillion naira. At the bottom of the newspaper on page 6, we are an umpire, not hired hitman. ADC youth tells Amupitan. On page 24 of the newspaper, refinancing risks rise as Nigeria's debt nears 180 trillion naira. On page 29 of the newspaper, Enugu women demand senatorial slot. INEC chairman unveils report of forensic investigation on partisans ex post. Together on page 6 of the newspaper. Away from that to the Guardian. Boldly written on the Guardian, politics overshadows governance as NAS observe 93-day recess in 2026. You get it on page 6 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, CDS charges troops to crush bandits. Keep Nigeria safe at all costs. CDS charges troops to crush bandits. Keep Nigeria safe at all costs. Together on page 3 of the newspaper. Then on page 3 of the newspaper as well, INEC says fake X account was used to frame chairman as ADC youth protest. On page 3 of the newspaper as well, PDP NEC adopt 2027 election timetable, declares end to crisis. Still in the same newspaper on page 6, party leaders intensify contingency moves as ADC denies PRP talks. On page 4 of the newspaper, police pensioners take welfare protest to presidential villa. Police pensioners take welfare protest to presidential villa. On page 4 of the newspaper, NBC's directives to broadcasters erode press freedom. Independence, says NUG. On page 29 of the newspaper, alleged 8.7 billion naira fraud. Court admits 9 exhibits against Malami, wife and son. On page 5 of the newspaper, Daniel versus Abiodun, plot for Ogun East Senatorial District ticket tightens. On page 8 of the newspaper, midnight fire raises therapy building at Yobe Neuropsychiatric Hospital. You get that on page 8 of the newspaper. Still in page 29 of the newspaper, bandits kill 4 soldiers. Vigilante in Kwara State. Bandit kill 4 soldiers and vigilante in Kwara State. Very quickly from that newspaper to the Nigerian Tribune. Boldly written on page 16 of the newspaper, how ADC presidential candidates may emerge. How ADC presidential candidates may emerge. At the top of the newspaper, Daniel shot out as Ogun East APC endorses Obiodun for Senate. You find it on page 14 of the newspaper. Then on page 3 of the newspaper, 4 soldiers vigilante feared killed in terrorist attack in Kwara State. At the bottom of the newspaper on page 2, APC presidential candidate to emerge May 16. NWC fixed governor primary for May 23rd. Then on page 4 of the newspaper, Tinubu approves 15 billion naira take-off grant for new police academy campus in Ogun State. On page 16 of the newspaper, Wike calls for committee on reconciliation. Wike calls for committee on reconciliation. On page 6 of the newspaper, CBN wants banks to unlock 1 billion monthly diaspora inflow by year end. Away from that newspaper to the Vanguard. On Vanguard, in page 5 of the newspaper, many terrorists, 3 soldiers killed in Kwara gun battle. Many terrorists, 3 soldiers killed in Kwara gun battle. On top of the newspaper on page 19, NCC CBN launch portal to track fraudulent phone lines. On page 9 of the newspaper, Kazim Baba Ahmed says Tinubu disconnected from hardship facing Nigerians. Then on page 8 of the newspaper, ADC says no talks with PRP yet. We are focused on court case. On page 14 of the newspaper, running to Abuja, governors can fix insecurity coming from ex-CP Owusheni. Still in the same newspaper at the bottom, police pensioners protest in Abuja, block Villa Access Road. You get it on page 9 of the newspaper. In the same newspaper on page 10, Ogun State APC leaders endorse Abiodun ban Daniel. Then on page 35 of the newspaper, APC pegs presidential form at 100 million. Primary holds May 15. Away from that newspaper to the Punch. On the Punch, boldly written in page 2, APC imposes 2-week deadline for presidential governorship NAS forms. At the top of the newspaper, fresh turmoil in PDP as Wike Camp rules out primaries plan. You get it on page 2 of the newspaper. Then in page 14 of the newspaper, over 4,600 Nigerian doctors relocate to UK in 3 years. Over 4,600 Nigerian doctors relocate to UK in 3 years. Then in page 7 of the newspaper, Obi Kwankwaso launch joint movement before ADC primaries. Away from that newspaper to the Matrix, boldly written, war against insecurity. Defense chief talks tough. You get it on page 2 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper in page 3, NGX extends trading hours to boost market liquidity, investor access. Still in the same newspaper on page 3, INEC forensic report clears chairman Amupitan of partisanship. On page 9 of the newspaper, NCC, CBN deepen consumer safety drive, inaugurate committees for protection against fraud. On page 8 of the newspaper, ADC debunks coalition, rumors with PRP ahead of court ruling. On page 9 of the newspaper, APC pegs presidential form at 100 million, sets May 15 for primaries. Away from that to the Daily Monitor, boldly written, go after bandits, other criminals until they are eliminated, CDS other troops. On page 2 of the newspaper, retired police officers block presidential villa gate over pension scheme. On page 4 of the newspaper, oil field dispute, court dismisses suit against petroleum minister, NUPRC AGF. On page 12 of the newspaper, NCC, CBN sign pact to boost consumer protection, coup fraud. At the bottom of the newspaper, Tinubu disconnected from Nigeria's hardship. Tinubu disconnected from Nigeria's hardship. Away from that newspaper to the Hope, boldly written, Southwest region has benefited 62 billion naira, Ayidatiwa reviews. On top of the newspaper, court admits night exhibit in Malami's money laundry trial. Court admits 9 exhibits in Malami's money laundry trial. Still in the same newspaper, Ondo begins 2026 promotion exercise for 3,000 workers. Boko Haram issues 72 hours ultimatum, demands 5 billion naira ransom for 416 captives. Ondo INEC gets new ref. NIMET forecast 3-day rainy, sunny weather condition nationwide. We've come to the end of the newspaper. Many thanks for watching. I am Kasituni. We'll bring you more updates across Nigeria. Do have a lovely day.